Awesome. Well, tell me a little bit about what you got going on. I'm sure at this point, you guys have heard me ask sellers that question probably a couple of thousand times. And it's what I ask every single seller. It's my third question, right? Still looking to sell that property? Awesome. How much are you looking to get for it? Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about what you got going on. Today's video is going to be about that question and the objective behind it, what we're trying to identify, what we need to do after they answer, and also how to overcome the objections that can come along with asking that vague of a question. So first and foremost, when we ask that question, we are trying to identify what is the most important aspect to this real estate transaction to the seller. Now, when you're vague and it's an open-ended question like this, tell me a little bit about what you got going on. There's times where they can just go to the default bullet point statistics, right? Well, I got a 1,200, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not what we're trying to get after. Really what we want to know is, why are they looking to sell? What's the occupancy? What's the condition? What's their timeline? Is there financial distress? Is the property physically distressed? And if they're truly motivated, what we've seen is by asking this open-ended of a question, the vast majority of sellers are going to jump right into the most important aspect of this deal right then and there. And this makes us a lot more efficient on our seller calls. So for example, if I were to ask a seller, tell me a little bit about what you got going on, and they say, well, it's a vacant property. It was a rental property, but the tenants just moved out. They didn't want to renew their lease. It's distressed now, and I really just don't want to fix up the property. This is my favorite example to use because it's also one of the most common responses that we get, especially for deals that we close. The property is now vacant and it's distressed and they don't have the money or they don't want to spend the money on fixing up the property. Now, what happens when they answer that way is we have now immediately identified this is a seller that we want to continue having a conversation with because we know that it is a property that needs an investor to come in and purchase it, right? It was an investment property. It's now vacant. It's distressed. Most owner occupants are not going to be willing to come in and remodel a house, right? That's just not what the majority of them do. That's what investors do. We come in and we rehabilitate these properties. So this motivation right up front now gives us the runway for where we want to take the rest of the conversation. What I will say, when they open up and they give you that motivation early on, a lot of times what we do as closers is we make assumptions that we understand their true motivation. Now, vacant property, physically distressed, I now understand why they're motivated to sell this property to an investor. However, we are normally 3 to 4 more questions away from fully understanding what the true motivation is. So, an example here. They say the property is vacant and physically distressed. They don't want to put the money into fixing it up. We need to choose at this point as the closer which path we want to go down. Do we want to talk about the former occupancy? Do we want to talk about the fact that the property is physically distressed so we could go down condition? Or do we want to talk about the financial aspect, right? The fact that they don't want to invest money. What I would say here is ultimately we're going to have to touch base on all of those. But the first maneuver here is the most important. The first question that we ask following their response. So however they deliver that to you and how they kind of express what was the most painful part of that, right? That's where you need to choose and stay in that lane. So for example, If they were to say that it's vacant and it's physically distressed and they don't want to put the money into it, I'm going to go down the path of, well, you say you don't want to put the money into it. Talk to me a little bit about how much money do you think it needs based off the condition it's in? Because this covers two of the motivating factors as to why they want to sell the property: the physical distress element, the condition, and then also the financial aspect of they not wanting to put money into the property. It's two of the factors that we need to, we're really questions that we need answered. And it allows them to decide to really tell you moving forward what's the real true motivating factor here. Okay, is it the fact that the property is so physically distressed that that's why they want to sell, or is it really because they just don't have any money? This is important because what was the first question that we asked them? We asked them how much do they want for the property. So we have an asking price. We now understand that they're motivated to sell, so we can now place them in one of the 4 seller buckets. Well, because they're motivated, that only gives us 2 more buckets to pick: highly motivated, and either the price is correct or incorrect. So moving forward, we will now know how to navigate the conversation. It's important for us to truly understand their motivation, because as we start discussing the price and the numbers, right, whether it's a correct price or an incorrect price, it's, do we need to educate them on how we're coming up with that number? How do we do that? Well, first we have to understand the condition so we can get an accurate rehab estimate, right? And then we also need to understand their financial situation. So we ask them, you say you don't want to put any money into this property because of the condition, right? What does that mean? How much work does it really need, and how much money are you thinking it needs to be rehabbed? This is where the seller is going to really start opening up to you, talking about all the things that are done that need to be fixed on the property and how much money they anticipate that's going to cost. In the meantime, we're underwriting this deal, we're analyzing it, and we're really trying to determine how much we can offer on this property, or if we can just agree to the price that they've already given us, right? And now we're making that decision on which one of the 4 seller buckets they're in. Now, say that we identify that the seller is in the price is incorrect bucket, the most common bucket that we are going to get on the majority of our calls, okay? At this point, the first thing that we want to do is get them to agree on what the property could be worth once it's fixed up, the after repair value. Okay, once we get them to agree to what that number is, we move on to getting them to agree to what the rehab amount is going to take to get it to achieve that after repair value. This is extremely important that you do it in that order, okay? Because after repair value is easier to get a seller to understand, because you're going to be basing it off of facts. You're going to be able to point to a specific address and say, well, the house across the street at 123 Main Street sold for this amount. Okay. The next number, once we move to rehab, that's always a little bit more difficult to get a seller to agree to, right? You'll see this specifically with the investor types. Well, I don't know how much it's going to cost you. I mean, are you going to do the work yourself, or are you going to hire someone? Because that makes a big difference, right? I'm always just fully transparent, and I let them know I don't do the work myself, because I don't. I mean, have there been times where I've done work on properties? Absolutely. However, it's very rare, and normally it's because we went over budget and I was just doing it to save my tail, okay? It's not the ideal scenario, and it's not inside of how we run our business. So we just let them know, no, I do not plan on doing the work myself. And so based off of that, this is how I'm coming up with my rehab numbers. If we could get the seller to agree to the after repair value and the rehab amount, the rest of the conversation is just a mathematical equation. If you guys use our profit calculator, it's very simple. You stair step them down. I've got an after repair value of X. I've got to take into consideration the closing costs when I purchase the property from you, and also when I sell it to the end buyer. I've got to consider my holding costs. I've got to consider the rehab amount. And of course, I want to make profit That's how I'm coming up with this amount. Now, let's say the seller is in the price is correct. All we need to do at that point in time is just continue down the closer's formula, reverse rapport, ask them what the best price they could do for you is, and then close the deal. All right. All of this stems from this question of, tell me a little bit about what you got going on. Now, there's always the chance of the objections happening. So let's talk about the different types of objections that I personally have heard. Okay. And there's always going to be more that can happen. But the most common one is normally from the non-motivated sellers. But tell me a little bit about what you got going on. What do you mean by that? What do I got going on? You know, stuff like that. I don't know what you mean. Specifically, what are you trying to ask me, right? More aggressive tonality and just kind of trying to diffuse the fact that you're asking an open-ended question. My response to that is, I don't know much about the property, okay? You filled out a form or we reached out to you or whatever the lead generation is. We know that you have a property that you want to sell. I can see some vague information on the internet, but I need to understand the occupancy, the timeline, the condition. I'd love to know why you're looking to sell the property. How'd you come up with the price that you're asking for it? I mean, listen, I'm interested in buying the property. Sell me on it. Sell me on why I would want to buy this property. Normally, that will loosen up the seller enough to get them to start conversating with us and kind of lower their defenses, where you're really just explaining to them, hey, I need to gather all this information to make this decision. If it doesn't, then I let them know, you just asked me to give you X amount of dollars. In order for me to make that decision, I'm going to need you to tell me some information about what's going on with this property. Otherwise, we don't have anything to talk about. If the first rebuttal didn't work, the second one almost always does. And if it doesn't, quite frankly, is that even a seller that you want to do business with? If they're not willing to give us any information about what's going on with the property, I just want to move on. Okay. Now, some mistakes that I've heard. Well, also pivots that we've made in regards to how we navigate this part of the conversation. Do not say, tell me a little bit about what you got going on with the property. Okay, when you do that, you're pointing them in too direct, right? You're saying the property. What that gets you is statistics and probably condition. That might not be the most important aspect of this transaction to the seller. It also might not be the most important aspect of the information that we need to gather to make a decision, right? We actually need to identify, are they a motivated seller? If you look at the 4 seller buckets, if they do not have motivation, then we do not close the deal. The 2 most important aspects, price, motivation. If they're not a motivated seller, then we as wholesalers are not their solution. That is deal manufacturing, is not deal finding. Okay. We need to identify the sellers that need to sell their house for a discount because of this motivating factor. That's why it's important for us to identify what is that motivation. And the best way that I have figured out how to do that is by simply asking them early on, tell me a little bit about what you got going on. And if you see it time and time again, and you're like, man, RJ, you make it sound so simple. It is. You can go watch me close deal after deal after deal by simply saying, you have a property you want to sell? How much you want for it? Awesome. Tell me a little bit about what you got going on. Try it. See how it works for you. But understand, once that response comes, you need to ask another minimal 3 to 4 open-ended questions to truly identify what this seller's motivation is. Let me know if you guys have used this question inside of your closes. Let me know if it works for you. Make sure you guys give me a like, and we will see you tomorrow.